I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Friday, July 18th. We begin with day 2 of this week's federal meetings with chiefs in Gatineau, Quebec. It's the Liberal government's follow-up with First Nations on the passage of Bill C-5, meant to fast-track major economic projects. With more on what Thursday's proceedings entailed, Fraser Needham.
Mark Carney says he wants to hear from First Nations on how best to proceed on economic projects that are deemed in the national interest. This is the Prime Minister speaking to media prior to the beginning of the second day of the summit.
And so the level of engagement, the seniority of engagement, I'm here, I'll be here all day with my ministers, and principally here to listen to about that how and that engagement.
And here's Carney speaking again about the importance of the government listening to and consulting with First Nations in his opening speech.
And the emphasis on listening, Ishkode. We are here to listen, and we are starting as we mean to go forward by listening, engaging, working together.
There are numerous pleas from First Nations leaders to slow down on the passage of Bill C-5, the government's signature piece of economic development legislation that Indigenous groups say could be used to override their rights. The Liberals rammed the piece of legislation through Parliament and the Senate in 2 weeks with virtually no committee consultation in the spring.
They must have just made that decision.
Speaking outside the summit on Thursday morning, Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanek says she was disappointed the Prime Minister's staff decided to prevent media from covering her keynote speech, something she wanted them to hear.
Of course, we're not the ones organizing today. We didn't, rightfully so. The Assembly of First Nations, of course, walks a fine line, as many people, know how that can be.
Southern Chiefs Organization Grand Chief Jerry Daniels says he understands the Prime Minister wants to fast-track key economic projects and cut through red tape. But he says Carney may be unrealistic when it comes to the creation of a major projects office.
The big push here, I think, is trying to create a framework for consultation, a framework for how are they going to see economic development or large-scale projects move throughout Canada. And they want to create a one-shop model that's going to work for everybody. I don't think that necessarily works. You have different cultures, different beliefs right across the country. And so some of us do things in a different way.
But the Prime Minister does have his supporters when it comes to Bill C-5.
It brings a lot of clarity to our nation where projects.
And one of them is Chinapaqua Dakota Nation Chief Clayton Brown.
Oil, pipelines, True North corridor. These are the things that we feel that we can benefit from.
I think the answer is frustration, really frustration from First Nations.
But at the same time, AFN Regional Chief for British Columbia, Terry Tichy, says the Carney government has missed an incredible opportunity by not including First Nations next week in the First Minister's meeting on the Trump tariffs and failing to seriously engage them on how best to move forward in these troubled economic times.
Because, quite simply, we could have been part of the solution and really having to deal with this existential crisis that is from the Trump administration.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The discovery of ancestral remains has halted work at a southern Ontario construction site. Yet, as Annette Francis reports, some say the excavation was ill-advised to begin with.
Things are quiet here at the site where remains were found within large excavated soil deposits 2 weeks ago. According to a statement from Ontario Power Generation, or OPG, a bone fragment was found during archaeological work at the site. In a joint statement by several area First Nations, they say OPG and its contractor did not follow the proper Heritage Act procedures. Alderville First Nation Chief Tainer Simpson says the excavation started a few months ago without an archaeological assessment.
And once we found out that none had been done, we asked for a stop to the excavation. There were already soil piles on site. So the proponent, OPG, agreed to halt everything. And they also agreed to sift all of the piles that were there. So it was estimated that it was going to take 40 days of screening and sifting all the soil piles to do it all.
There's 4 stages in the archaeological assessment process.
Former Chief Dave Mowat was there 10 years ago when this plaque was erected to educate the public. He's now a senior Indigenous engagement advisor for Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Mowat agrees proper procedures weren't followed.
Stage 1 to 4, and 4 can mean mitigation and excavation of sites. It seems to me that there was a lack of complete oversight that should have occurred. Again, it's not a surprise to me because it continues to happen. with the level of development occurring in Ontario, Southern Ontario, it's almost like our prehistory is being eradicated from the ground. That's my lament.
Simpson says the full scale of the destruction won't be known until all the material has been screened. The site is located near the shores of Lake Ontario at a historic area called Scugog Carrying Place.
And this was an area where our people would meet at all times of the year. It's where the north shore of Lake Ontario met the Trent River system, and this is where a lot of trades would happen, a lot of ceremony would happen. So this was a hub of activity. And it was also in an area where, on the shores of the rivers and the lake there, where people would bury their relatives once they passed on.
Simpson says in spite of receiving an apology from OPG last week, more work needs to be done.
I think this is where the dialogue and negotiations would, become forefront. So obviously there's some work that we need to do with OPG. We need to reframe our understanding. And I think we just have to sit down at the table and really talk about what our partnership looks like moving forward.
According to OPG's statement, it is committed to working with First Nations to ensure a full investigation is complete. Simpson says it could take up to a year to sift through every pile of soil here, but says the search shouldn't end until every bone fragment is found and returned to a safe resting place. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Oshawa, Ontario.
To Manitoba, where officials say just under 13,000 people from 9 communities have been evacuated due to wildfires. They say in all, 68 hotels now provide rooms to evacuees, with 705 more added from shelters earlier this week. And with 2 shelters newly opened in Winnipeg, that brings them to a total of 4 in the city, including the downtown RBC Convention Centre. The provincially run shelters offer over 6,000 beds, with hotel rooms meant for those with higher medical need. The fire danger level is high to very high in most of Manitoba. It's especially extreme in the northeast. Still very active, the wildfire near Garden Hill First Nation, with no reported loss of structures so far. Despite the many fires near populated areas, weather forecasts have officials believing no other communities are currently under threat. Christine Stevens is with the province.
We know that it's really hard to be away from home, and people have questions and are eager for some clarity around why have some moved to hotels and some others haven't, and what that process is. And really that process is not simple. What we're looking to do is really match hotel availability with the supports that people need. So that means that we look at medical needs. We don't want people to be placed somewhere where they're going to have to drive hours for medical appointments. It's about mobility and making sure people are in accessible rooms if that's what they need them. It's about proximity to services and keeping communities together. And it's also about making sure that we can have folks places where meals can be provided if people do need 3 meals provided every single day.
Meanwhile, wildfires continue to wreak havoc in Saskatchewan. Now, the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency, or SPSA, has called on firefighters from outside Canada to help. Rachel May reports.
The SPSA has called on partners from across the province, but also from across Canada, the United States, and right around the world.
The fires have forced evacuations and blocked vital roads. SPSA chairperson Tim McLeod said in a virtual press conference that while help has been coming from the U.S., 2 more countries have now joined the effort.
We've received firefighting supports from nearly every province and territory and from several American states, including Alaska, Colorado, and Washington. Last week, Quebec once again sent 2 aircraft and an additional 100 wildfire personnel. This week, we welcomed 40 firefighters from Australia, and we will welcome 40 additional firefighters from Mexico in the next few days.
There are currently 48 active wildfires in Saskatchewan, with 10 communities under evacuation. Residents from Canoe Lake, Jans Bay, La Plonge, Lac La Plonge Resort Division, Montreal Lake, Beauval, Pine House, Pachinak, and English River First Nation have been relocated across the province, from Meadow Lake to Regina. The road to Pachinak is now closed, and with that community evacuated, supplies for firefighters have to be flown in.
The people that have to leave their homes with a bag, not knowing if they're going to come home to a home.
Athabasca MLA Leroy LaLiberty says more support is needed for evacuees and for those who stayed behind to help fight the fires. He says people might be tired of hearing about northern fires, but it's not just the evacuees being affected.
But these fires are destroying our traditional territory. You think about all of the animals, the medicines that people pick. For a lot of people, they see bush, but for us, that's home.
When asked what he wants to see, LaLiberty called on the Saskatchewan Party to step up, provide evacuees with timely support, and have the Premier admit that the province wasn't prepared for a fire season that happens every year.
Premier Scott Moe, do your job. Stand up, and I'm saying the same thing to the Sask Party government.
Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Friday, July 18th. I'm Rick Harp.